What happened in Westworld Season 3, Episode 4, The Mother of Exiles? What did we learn about who the secret hosts are and what Dolores' plan actually is? Let's dig into it and find out. Hi everyone, this is Robert. Welcome to Deep Geek. I'll be covering Westworld Season 3 in full, so if you want episode breakdowns, explanations, live discussions and much more, please click on the subscribe button in the bottom right of your screen and the bell icon. For the first time this season, we see all four of the main strands of this season's story in one episode: Dolores, Maeve, Bernard and William. Let's start with William. We pick up on his story 3 months after the massacre at Westworld. He has, it would appear, gone on a sabbatical. That's code for spending time in his house drinking, trashing the place and generally being tormented by his own demons. One of them manifests in his mind as Emily, his daughter, who he mistakenly killed, thinking she was a host. He rants and raves at the walls, clearly not in a good place. It's understandable. Less than a year earlier, he had been the master of all he surveyed. Now he has lost everything, and it is all his fault. He's trying to work out who he is, how much to blame he is, alternating between beating himself up for what he's done and debating whether he had any choice at all. As imaginary Emily asks him, "Are you free and evil, or blameless and helplessly enslaved?" Neither option seems palatable. But he's wrenched out of this by the arrival of Charlotte. She, ostensibly at least, was trying to get him back into the corporate world so he could use his voting shares to authorise the next step of Dolores' plan, taking Delos back into private hands to fend off a hostile takeover bid from Insight. Serac, as we know, is trying to buy out the company so that he can get the rest of Delos' data. Serac knows that Rehoboam's model is incomplete. It doesn't have a full map of the human mind. Delos does, though, and he intends to get it. In case you missed the link here, Charlotte says that Delos can fend off Insight's takeover bid because they have a deep-pocketed investor. This, it would seem, is at least part of what Dolores intends to use Liam Dempsey Jr.'s billions of dollars for. We see her, Connells and Caleb in this episode scamming Liam out of his money. She's using Insight's money against itself. Anyway, to return to William, it turns out that this is all an elaborate ruse on Charlotte or Dolores' part to get him committed to a mental institution, to show how deranged he currently is, get him taken away, his voting rights or shares handed over to Charlotte, so the defence against Serac can continue. They didn't need William, after all, just his votes in the board meeting. Incidentally, Westworld was, and hopefully still is, planned as a 5-season arc, and this episode is the centre point of that, halfway through the middle season. It is surely intentional that in this episode we see the complete swapping of Dolores and William's positions. At the start of Season 1, it was William who had all the power and money, tormenting the helpless Dolores. He had all the volition and control, she had none, a victim of her coding. Now, halfway through the overarching story, that is completely reversed. He is trapped, a victim of his own coding, apparently. She is free and rich and powerful, and uses that to torment him. They have swapped roles. We're being asked to consider whether our sympathies have changed or not. But now let's turn our attention to Bernard and Stubbs. We don't get much on them, but they have returned to the mainland after Bernard's little sojourn back into Westworld. Bernard has got into his head that Dolores' plan is to replace influential world leaders with hosts. This, incidentally, is part of the evil plan in Future World, the sequel to the original Westworld film. Bernard makes the logical next step in then assuming that the person who had been replaced with a host was Liam Dempsey Jr. So his plan is to find Liam, immobilise him. Bernard has invented some kind of clicker that can freeze a host. This seems very similar to the one Serac used to pause Maeve back in episode 2. But when they get there, they find that Liam Dempsey hasn't been replaced. So they try just bundling him away for his own safety. Dolores stops them. She had been expecting them, it would seem. She really is always one step ahead of her rivals this season, presumably because she has access to Rehoboam. So what is Dolores up to here? Well, we discover one of the reasons why she needed to recruit Caleb, or at least a human, not necessarily Caleb. The authorization she needed from Liam Dempsey's money manager in order to steal all that money required the encryption key in his blood, and she needed to inject that into another human to get around the security system. Serac's attempts to fight back against Dolores include trying to get Maeve to track down Dolores. He tried to persuade her to do it in episode 2, if you remember, so this is him trying again with a slightly different approach. This time he tries to get her to go after Dolores by revealing that Dolores is carrying around with her access to the Sublime, that host heaven we saw last season. That's where Maeve's daughter is, and where Maeve seems to want to be too. The promise of that, as well as a threat that he can always just shut her down again, seems to do the trick. I don't believe for 1 second that Maeve has actually bought into his plans, but she seems to go with it and heads off into the underworld of Singapore, tracking Dolores through the Mortician and to Sato, the head of the Yakuza. Which brings us to the big reveal at the end of the episode. Sato is a host, one of the 5 Dolores brought with her. He looks like Musashi, a character you may remember from that episode of Season 2 set in Shogun World, but it's not him. It's actually Dolores in there. In fact, Dolores has put herself in Connell's and Charlotte too. Dolores realised that the only person she trusted to do the job she had planned was herself, so she just made lots of copies of herself. Okay, so that's quite a big reveal, so let's unpack it a bit, because there are a lot of implications. The first is that with the introduction of Sato, or Musashi, we now know where 4 of those 5 pearls are. Sato, Connell's, Charlotte, and Bernard. So there's only 1 more left unaccounted for. There is, it has to be said, something odd about the Sato Musashi Dolores reveal. Not so much in the fact that it's Dolores in there, but why it's Musashi's body. Why not just replace Sato's own body, as she had done with both Charlotte and Connell's? Was it just to convince Maeve that it was Musashi in there? If so, that plan failed, and it seems a pretty basic one for Dolores. And another thing that doesn't quite ring true is that Musashi tells Maeve that she left him in Shogun World to die. Maeve shakes her head at this. No, she had given him a choice, and he chose to stay. Again, Maeve is being faced with someone who seems to fundamentally not understand noble intentions. This isn't quite as stark as what happened with Lee Sizemore in episode 2, when the simulation of him was based on a false assumption of his motivations, but perhaps it's a hint that Maeve isn't yet out of the simulation. Could Serac be using Maeve to track down Dolores within the simulation, the mirror world, rather than in the real world? Perhaps. And perhaps even more interesting is why Dolores would replace Sato with a host at all. If she just used him to smuggle some bodies out, as we're told, then she doesn't need to waste one of her 5 precious pearls pretending to be him afterwards, so presumably there is another, more important thing she needs to do with him. The answer probably lies in the white sludge that the Yakuza appear to be stockpiling or manufacturing. There seems to be a lot of it, huge vats of the stuff, and the only time we've seen that used is in order to create new hosts. We don't know yet, but it appears that Dolores is using the Yakuza to build a secret host army. Finally, let's address what there being lots of Doloreses all in different bodies might mean for the plot. On face value, we might think that that means that they will all be working together in complete harmony, each wanting the same thing and thinking in the same way, but I don't think that will be the case. We saw in episode 3 that the host inside Charlotte Hale was starting to feel as if the real Charlotte was inside her and trying to wrest back control. It's as if pretending to be Charlotte all that time made her more like Charlotte and less like Dolores. I think the big reveal of Season 3 will turn out not to be so much about who is hidden in each body as how like Dolores they have each remained. This is what Jonathan Nolan had to say on this very subject after Episode 3 aired. If you take two copies of the same person, but set them on slightly different trajectories but with the same goals, would they remain the same person? Would they maintain the same goals? Or would some part of the character, the version of Dolores who has been forced to pretend to be Hale, in pretending to be Hale, has she absorbed any of her methods of thinking? Is she absorbing any of who Hale was? Or is a natural consequence of being in a different circumstance than the original Dolores be that they may not remain the same person anymore? That they may not even be allies? It is a larger question that we think is a lot of fun to play with. So keep an eye out for not all of these Doloreses being of one mind. The drama in the second half of the season won't just be Dolores versus the world. It will also be Dolores versus other versions of Dolores. But what do you think? Let me know in the comments section below, or join me on Sundays at 5 PM Eastern Time for my pre-show livestream. In Deep Geek, we'll be covering Season 3 of Westworld in full. The link to my Westworld Season 3 playlist is on the left of your screen, so please click on that if you want more episode breakdowns, discussions and theory videos about this season. Or if you'd like to support In Deep Geek, or get access to some of the content I create exclusively for my patrons, please click on the link on the right of your screen. Thanks for watching, take care, and I'll see you again soon.